Konnichiwa, this is the Shogunstein, and this is a historical background of the game Stroganov by Andreas Steding. And I didn't realize when I picked up this game that this is the designer of Hans Teutonica. And my buddy Board Game Bullocks just did a great review of Hans Teutonica on his channel. So a little cross promotion there. Check out Board Game Bullocks and his review of Hans Teutonica. So I didn't put two and two together. But what I did notice was this game was in what is known as the rubbish bin. This is the KS Deluxe version, and it was on sale for $19. And it has a lot of stuff, and we'll get into the game and how to play it later. But what I'd like to do is a little historical background on the Stroganov family, who we know are most famous for beef stroganoff. And that does possibly involve the Stroganov family, and possibly when Pavel Stroganov went to France and maybe brought the dish back to Russia, or when a famous French chef had been spending some time in St. Petersburg and named the dish after the prominent Stroganov family. But in all seriousness, the Stroganov family is much more important in Russian and Siberian history than just the very famous beef dish. The Stroganovs were a merchant family, and it's believed they came from the Tartars. So again, if you think of Eastern Europe and Russia, and you have all these different groups of people living there, so you had the Tartars, and it's believed that the Stroganovs came from that group of people. And in addition to being famous and important merchants in Russian history, they're also very important for the colonization of the Urals and the Siberian region, and ultimately the annexation of the Siberian region to the Russia. So the Stroganov family initially got into salt mining. That was their original way to gain wealth, and it started in the early 1500s. They say about 1515 that they started salt mining. And in 1558, the Tsar, Ivan IV, granted the Stroganov family a bunch of land where they continued to be involved in salt mining, and they were also in the iron business, timber, and fur. And I believe a big part of this game deals with the actual fur trade. People forget, even in the history of the West in this country, the United States, that fur and pelts was actually the most valuable resource prior to gold. So there was a lot of money in pelts. So in the 1570s, the Stroganovs began to increasingly get into conflicts with the indigenous people and the Khans that ruled Siberia. And that's going to put this on the road to the annexation of Siberia to Russia. So it's interesting, again, in board gaming that there's a lot of selective outrage over colonization and games that have a colonization theme. For instance, recently there was a game about the East India companies, and there was a lot of people on some website called BGG complaining about colonization. That theme comes up a lot. But again, there seems to just unfortunately be some inconsistency in the outrage in certain elements of board gaming, where some games about colonization are bad, but other games about colonization get a pass. For instance, just think of all the Viking games. Think of all the colonization and conquest Vikings did. People love Viking games. You never hear anyone complaining about the games that have Viking raids. But the Stroganov family was involved with conflicts with the indigenous people of Siberia and with the Khans who ruled Siberia prior to the Russian annexation. That annexation is going to start with, again, Ivan IV, and that starts in around the 1580s, and that won't be completed until the 18th century. So again, the history of Russia and Siberia, that annexation process starts around 1581, and it'll go through the 17th and 18th century. The Stroganov family remained very prominent, and in 1613, they were financial backers of the Romanovs, who eventually will rule Russia. So they gave the Romanovs a lot of support as they took power and were going to rule as czars of Russia until 1917, when there are not one, but two revolutions in Russia. First, you had the earlier revolution with the provisional government, where they attempted to make Russia a limited monarchy. Unfortunately, the provisional government under Kerensky stayed involved in World War One, and those losses and food shortages. Again, think of the Bolshevik slogan, land, peace, and bread. That'll lead to the November Revolution, 1917, where the communists take over, and eventually the execution of pretty much the entire ruling Romanov family. But back in 1613, it is the Stroganov family that does help the Romanovs take over. And one of the most powerful Stroganovs was Gregory. And Gregory is going to be a big backer of Peter the Great, and is going to be very involved in helping Peter the Great in his process of westernizing and modernizing Russia, including the building of some modern Navy ships. So there's a long history of the Stroganovs with Russia, and again, this game has a heavy theme in terms of the fur trade, but the Stroganovs are much more than just the famous dish. Again, very heavily involved in being merchants. Again, salt, iron, timber, fur. Also helping the Romanovs take power, helping Russia annex Siberia, helping Peter the Great modernize Russia. So a very powerful family, very interesting history, and again, a unique theme in gaming. You don't get a lot of games with this kind of theme. But again, as someone who has a side gig in history, it's always interesting how colonization and imperialism is handled in board gaming with that kind of inconsistent outrage. Again, thinking of all these Viking games, I highly recommend listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History recent podcast on the Vikings. And, again, listen to that podcast, hear about what the Vikings did. And again, why do Viking games get a pass? But, and again, I'm not in any way defending colonization or imperialism. I'm not trying to defend bad behavior with any other bad behavior. I'm not an apologist for imperialism. I don't like colonization. I'm just saying that there's just a lot of inconsistency in the outrage in board gaming over themes of colonization and imperialism. A few months back, there was a new game on Catherine the Great, and that got, a lot of... I hated that game. I thought it was a terrible game. But it got a lot of great reviews from people. And again, Catherine the Great gets a pass. East India Companies doesn't get a pass. Again, not justifying, imperialism or colonization, just pointing out some of that hypocrisy in board gaming on this theme. So we'll take a look at the components and how to play. I set up, came with these really cool inserts. Took me about an hour to set that up. So this is the deluxe version. We'll, unbox it for you a little further. We'll show you how to play, and we'll let you know what we think of the game, whether it's worth the $18. Anyway, this is the Shogunstein with a little historical background on the Stroganov family. Shogunstein out.